just to give you some background and context, I graduated from high school in Pennsylvania in 1964 and then went to Lafayette College, again in Pennsylvania. Graduated in 68 and went to the University of Michigan. I had been accepted at Harvard, sort of a waiting list, if you will. And all the advisors said, oh, you'll get accepted. They always accept people that are on the waiting list. But I didn't want to wait around. My father-in-law at that time, I having been married at the end of college in 1968, had gone to the University of Michigan. So I thought I would please him. I guess that's why. So I went to the University of Michigan, and my wife and I trekked all the way out the Pennsylvania Turnpike to Ann Arbor, which is a lovely college town, and then spent 3 years there, matriculating, I guess is the word. And we lived in an old house on the second floor, the first floor. And then they built a high-rise next to it. And so that was our first high-rise. It was on the 15th floor, I don't recall, with a great view of the campus. And the campus of the University of Michigan is quite beautiful. The law school is separate from the baccalaureate, science, engineering sections, built around a quadrangle. Indeed, it was called the Law Quadrangle. So I dived into that. It was quite difficult. Had not anticipated that because I'd always easily learned. But I did well and graduated then in 71, a 3-year course. Perhaps I should have gone on to get my master's, but as things eventuated, as you've already heard, I got more education outside the walls than I would inside. Indeed, I've said to people that your best experience is in the real world, not in the classroom where it's all dry and not all cases go to the Supreme Court. And I cite the case of the dog bite case, which was illustrative of the system of how matters progressed. So my wife and I stayed in Ann Arbor for a year while I finished the first year of law school. And she had meanwhile been appointed as associate dean of the education school, which was great. That meant I had in-school tuition, which was very substantially lower than outside state, I guess. So we moved to Grosse Pointe, Michigan, which is a very nice suburb right on Lake St. Clair. And we found a carriage house, I guess one would say, very large, 4 or 5 car bay, and the entire upstairs was glass windows, etc. But in the entryway, you walked right into the living room, was an enormous artist's window, perhaps 15 feet high and 15 feet wide, all glass panes. And of course, having decorator tendencies, I convinced my wife to put in shag green carpeting, spring green, apple green. That was all the rage then. I've seen a little bit coming back. Don't buy it. And it came with a wooden rake with spokes on it. And so you rake the rug. What a mess. Anyway, we fixed it all up. And there was, let me think, there was that big living room. It was probably 20 by 15. And next to that, on the right side, straight in front of the front door, was a dining room, which we fixed up. Big, round plywood table with a cover on it, which my wife made. Making round things is very difficult, I soon found out. sewing them. And just off of that was a powder room. So we removed the fixtures, the sink, the toilet. Did not have a bathtub, I don't think, or it had been taken out. So all the fixtures were removed. We put an animal themed carpet down and similar wallpaper, bright colors. This was the nursery. And then continuing on from the dining room was a den library type place where we placed a sofa that her grandmother had, and it had bookshelves and so forth. So it was kind of a hideaway. And next to that was the master bedroom with its bath. Oh, there was a bath off the living room. So we had 2 baths, which was pretty cool in those days. And I think we paid, I don't know, at the most $300 a month. And then downstairs, of course, was the 4 or 5, I forget, bay garage. And about 400 feet away towards Lake St. Clair was the big house where the owners lived. And we got to know them. Now having considered it, the main house was probably only about 200 to 300 feet away from our house, otherwise known as servants' quarters, I suppose. Immediately behind us on the same side of the street was an exquisite Greek revival house that a couple, man and wife, had constructed. It had every detail you can imagine. It was very beautiful, exquisitely done. They had craftsmen from all over do it. And inside, it was equally wonderful. I had a black walnut baluster going upstairs, finest of materials, and lovely people. And we went to dinner one night, and a maid served us baked brie, which I had never had before. It's little slices of brie put on a baking sheet and shoved into the oven, and they come out crispy like crackers. It's a new world. I had never been in a world like Grosse Pointe, let alone that house. And we became quite friendly. Sadly enough, they were in New York sometime during our residency, and a burglar came running past. They were staying at the River House, which was quite chic, I suppose, as they were standing outside waiting for a cab, and grabbed her necklace and ripped it off her neck and pulled her down. She broke her hip, among other things, and was recuperating for many, many months. A lovely woman, and how sad that should occur. They now rip off cell phones while you're walking down the street, while they're on bicycles. All of the above is disgusting. However, we remained friendly with them. And across the street, across Rathbone, and maybe we were number 2 Rathbone. I keep thinking we're number 1. Maybe we're number 2. Was a ramshackle, I would call it, older house, Gothic in nature is best I can describe it, with lots of plantings and trees around it you could barely see. And a woman named Edwige lived there, an unusual name, albeit just 3 or 4 days ago, I saw that name in a novel I was reading and almost jumped out of the chair. She was very nice. She was unusual, but we were friendly with her. And then the people at the main house, they were all the people and houses that were on Rathbone Place. We eventually realized that with a son getting older, we had to get a larger house. So we did. We got a house in Grosse Pointe Farms still, on Pine Court. Actually, putting all this together, after Rathbone Place, we moved to Grayton Road. That was our first house. It was a 1940s dark brick, typical of the era. Had 3 bedrooms, I believe, and 2 baths, and maybe a powder room downstairs, which would have been pretty neat in that era. And downstairs, as was and is typical, as you went in the front door, living room to the right, pretty big size, dining room to the left, next to that the kitchen, which had an extension on it, which was comprised a bench picnic table type thing. Everyone's seen those, with a bench down one side and a bench down the other, a bench in the back, and a fixed table in the middle, which was very nice for family meals, snacks, and certainly good for my son, who would like to throw food around. Not an unusual child. And we put the kitchen carpet in. That was all the rage in that period. I think it was blue and yellow and all kinds of things. And that was a disaster. Whoever invented that should be shot, but I'm sure he or she is dead. It was also the era of bathroom carpet, even a worse idea. And there was some in the house, and we threw it away. And underneath was wonderful black and white tile, which couldn't have been better. So we moved in. My wife and I had a front bedroom, I believe, and our son was across the hall. First in a crib, a convertible crib that could grow, if you will, into a bed. He soon learned how to get out of it, which was a problem. But it worked out fine. I'll never forget the day, though, that he took apart a flashlight, a normal flashlight. And I happened to notice what he was doing, and I called my wife very quietly and said, "Come to look at this." So he had the pieces on the floor, and he was assembling it exactly the way he needed to assemble it to get light. And he pushed the switch and light came on, and he kind of squealed. And I turned to my wife and said, "I guess he's kind of smart, or mechanically inclined anyway. He'll either do nuclear physics or he'll be a mechanic for cars." Anyway, our life there was good. We changed that long living room that had a big open archway, a common again of the era, into an extension, if you will, of the living room, which had bookshelves and all that sort of thing, which would make an ideal den. So I had the wall closed up, so it'd be a separate room. It did have a door to the kitchen, so it was perfectly suited. And we put our, excuse my language, record player in there. And I know you're all bewildered, so wait a second till you absorb that. And I used to put music on and dance with my son, which he loved. He just loved. In the kitchen, underneath the stove, as is true to today, was a drawer for pots, pans, miscellany, cookie sheets, etc. Everything in the kitchen was baby-proofed, as is the term today, except that, because there really wasn't anything in there he could hurt himself with. And he would sit on the floor in front of it. I can picture him to this day in his one-piece jammies with the non-slip feet, legs crossed, and pulling different things out and arranging them in kind of an architectural concept. He should have been an architect. But anyway, he had fun, I'll tell you. And then he would get a wooden spoon, which was available to him, and bang on them. Not very good music, but not completely crazy. And I said to him, "Son, let's not do that. It's making a racket." And his mother said, "No, let him go. It's creative." Well, she was the smart one in the family, undoubtedly. So we would let him go for a while, but cut it off after a while. The cacophony was too much. After that house, we moved to 47 Pine Court in Grosse Pointe Farms, directly across from the Episcopal Church or Cathedral, and Grosse Pointe Farms High School. It was an ideal location. We faced Grosse Pointe Boulevard, but our address was on Pine Court. And Pine Court comprised maybe 5, the most 6 houses of a very Grosse Pointe design, meaning very traditional. And our house was brown painted, dark tan, whatever, clapboard, with a door, the color of which I can't remember, but had a big brass knocker on it, and an extension, as you faced it, to the right, a breezeway, as it's called, I guess, to the garage, which was certainly advantageous in the winters there, which were unbearable. It had a very large living room and dining room, and except for the kitchen, would be considered open concept, very fashionable these days. Well, we were not open concept people, but it was very expensive to divide that. So my wife and I decided to add an extension in the L shape between the end of the dining room and the kitchen, the outside walls, which we did. We put in a very large bay window, or bow window, I guess. I think a bay window has a seat. I don't know. A large bow window, floor to ceiling, and a room of 12 by 15 perhaps, sliding glass doors at the far end towards the garage, so that my son would have a play area, basically, and we would have an entertaining area. The air conditioning and heating wasn't great, I must say. We had installed central air conditioning. That was essential to me. I've lost over 100 pounds, and now I get cold rather than hot. But anyway, at that time in 1975, something like that, air conditioning was essential. The lot was beautiful, had lots of flowering plants and trees, not enormous trees, what I would call shrub trees. And it was called a court because it was a oblong circle. And we were on the corner of Pine Court and Grosse Pointe Boulevard. And then down from us and around to the other corner were perhaps 5 houses. There weren't very many. It was a very nice place to live. Actually, the timing was different than I just stated. We moved out of 47 Pine Court in 1979. And we got the same amount of money as we had paid for the house. which was typical at the time. People were very happy with that. Today they have to make a fortune on it. In any event, that house, or that cul-de-sac, Pine Court, dead-ended, if you will, into another street that went down to Lakeshore Drive and Lake St. Clair. And dividing them was a very thick patch of foliage that the kids would love to go through and have their adventures, I suppose. And Lakeshore Drive is very famous, of course, for industrialists and other wealthy people. At one time, I believe Henry Ford lived on there at the very end of Lakeshore Drive. His mother lived there. Actually, it's Henry Ford II. His father was Henry Ford, and he had a son named Edsel. So when Henry Ford, the grandson, came along, he had to be named Henry Ford II, not Henry Ford Jr. That's all genealogy. But his mother had an enormous estate at the very end of Lakeshore Drive, the north end. I don't know what's happened to that now, but in any event, the road coming dead-ending, if you will, into Pine Court was Elm Court. And there were a number of houses on that, much more than on our court. And my son would play with the children there. And I remember one day sitting in this new family room or den and seeing my son march by with a stick on his shoulder like a gun, much to my horror these days, and crying. And he came in and he said to his mother and me, "They don't like me, they don't want to play with me." And we sat him down and I said, "What were you playing?" And he said, "Spaceships and stars and galaxies." And I said, or my wife said, "Son, you have to get used to the fact, because it's going to go on for your life. Other children are not as intelligent or knowledgeable as you are. It's beyond their scope to imagine galaxies. What are they? And stars and all these intergalactic things. So it's not that they don't want to play with you, it's that they're afraid of your intelligence. And we think you're extremely intelligent, so when they start that, just say, "Okay, let's play cowboys." He wasn't interested. But in any event, we stayed there for a while longer. Indeed, my grandmother, who died at 100 a number of years ago, was doing, was sewing, I forget the term, at that time, and she was probably 97. And she did a whole wide, tall picture of the 47 Pine Court with the pine trees, my son's swing set in the yard, squirrels on the roof, all kinds of things. And we have it to this day, which is quite a piece of folk art. It's a fond memory of that place. And just down the street from our house was Farms Market, which was the only delivery market I had ever heard of. So we could order anything and they would deliver it. I remember one day my wife was out of something, marshmallows, I seem to remember. Why we're eating marshmallows, I don't know. And so she called and they said, "Of course, we'll run them right over." Those were the days. In any event, the wife of one of the owners of Farms Market gave a cookie to each child that came into the store. And so my son was always anxious to accompany us whenever we went there, which wasn't terribly often because they delivered, which was a great blessing in the winter. because the snow was unbelievable and the cold and the wind. At 47 Pine Court, as another example of my son's mechanical genius, he constructed a banana light on the ceiling of his bedroom, which had all kinds of things in it. There was a banana stuck to the ceiling with tape, I suppose, and all kinds of other things. I can't imagine what they were. And I think we still have a picture of that. It looked like a spaceship or a spaceship, or a space station, I guess one would say. And whether it was for protection or imagination or what, I don't know. But that's the story of 47 Pine Court, which was a very nice place to live. And at that time, I had begun looking around at the end of that time. End of 79 or into 1980, I had been looking for another position. I was very bored at the law firm I was with, and contacted a headhunter who came up with a job in Texas, Houston. Where the heck is Houston? There's a bunch of cowboys? I don't know. But the general counsel at this company called me and said, gee, the spot we're looking for has been taken, but we're so impressed with your resume, we'd like to interview you, and we may well create a position for you. So I flew down to Texas, strange world, no Galleria, no nothing. And he interviewed me and then called me and offered me a very good position as assistant general counsel, I think. So we went down to Texas, looked around, found a place to rent on the bayou, never heard that word before, with floor-to-ceiling windows looking at these trees and this stream, and pursued to move. When we told my son, he threw himself on the living room floor and screamed and banged his feet, and a real temper tantrum. But we eventually moved, and he was happy. We knew he was happy when he came to school, home from school one day, and said, we asked him how it went, and he said, fine. I was sitting in row 2 or whatever he said, but now I'm sitting over yonder. And I thought, okay, he's used to the scene. And that was it.